Hi, I'm Ashley with Campbell. Thanks for investing your time to help your community be a great place to live. Before you watch the video, make sure to click the subscribe button so that we can help you make educated decisions as a board member.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for sharing your time with me today. As Ashley said, we are going to be going through the Florida Friendly Landscaping seminar, and I know you've obviously got a lot of options in order to what you could be doing your time with today. So again, I thank you for joining me on this one. So with that being said, a little history of CPM. We were founded in 1977, so we've been around for 40 plus years, and currently got about 520 employees and about 100 HOAs that we service in the I would say the Tri-County area, but we are now up in the St. Lucie area as well. So very excited to be here and speaking with you all today. So with that being said, I am going to get started, and we will, let me just take this away here. All right, perfect. All right, so let's see here. This is not letting me do this, so. All right, so sorry about that. My remote is not working, so I'm just going to do this manually. So the basis for the Florida Friendly Landscaping goes back to legislature that was created back in 2004, and it really came about as a directive from the water management districts, the DEP, and a lot of other interested parties that wanted to kind of devise some standards for the quality and aesthetics, as well as the kind of ecological aspects of landscape design here taking place in Florida. And these standards were finally officially adopted in about 2006. And any other ordinances that came about after this date, they were basically required to use these standards. So, and what are the six principles? So currently right now, the six principles that are in place for Florida Friendly Landscaping all revolve around the right plant, right place, the efficient watering of the landscape that's in the place, the appropriate fertilization being utilized, as well as mulching principles, the attraction of wildlife, and the responsible management of pest. So how does that all play in to what you currently see in place, whether it be in a HOA, a commercial setting, a individual homeowners kind of setting? And the six principles integrate what's called the best management practices. This is kind of what this CEU class is based on, is the best management practices manual. And it talks about the environmental impacts that we have currently with development. And the tough job being that we've got to meet the clients' and customers' expectations while still achieving kind of a utilization of the footprint. You need to be able to accommodate parking, pedestrian traffic, meeting the matrix of a landscape requirement in the particular municipality where this development is going in. How are we handling the runoff of the water now? We're going from a permeable surface to a non-permeable surface, or impermeable, and all at the same time as maximizing the revenue potential for the developer while also being attractive. Now, I'll obviously use this Florida Friendly Landscape term a lot throughout the presentation today, because it is what we are trying to achieve, and whether it be through natives or least impactful material that is currently available in our areas. So that practice usually will include trees, ornamentals or shrubs, and a lawn of either like a turf grass or potentially some other type of ground cover. Maybe it be a ornamental peanut, a jasmine minima, something along those lines. Now, Florida friendly refers to primarily native plant material that are well adapted, non-invasive, either a palm or a tree, and it will bring a balance to beauty through light and shade. It will help control wildlife habitats, control erosion and reducing noise, as well as modifying the temperature of the site. And what that means simply is because we won't touch on the modification of temperature until later on. And it's just when we go from having grass, tree, shade to a concrete jungle, as you might call it, as at a shopping mall or something, it's like, how are we going to moderate that new temperature? So let's start with the very first principle. It is right plant, right place. This refers to the plant selection and the location. And, more or less after weather, the actual practice is the biggest role in the success of the agronomic program. And the agronomic program will include the following: the height at which you mow, how you prune the material that's been installed, the correct time and make of fertilizer being applied, and your irrigation. Now, all of these components may sound different, but yet they are definitely undisputedly related. For example, if you were to fertilize during a drought, you're definitely going to have some heavy leaching after a strong rain. Yet if you inadequately fertilize, your plants, palms, etc., are definitely going to become weak. And the roots are going to be thin, and it's going to be more susceptible to insect and disease. And those weakened plants also, have a weaker root system, which is then going to further lead to either retaining soil in the root zone, or it's going to lead to basically erosion and then further water pollution. So let's tie these components in. Healthy turf is viewed as an aesthetic asset. It definitely plays an important role in reducing the water runoff, especially in an urban and suburban property, where significant areas have now been turned into an impervious surface, such as a parking lot and a sidewalk. These turf lawns can reduce the amount of runoff as it can process greater amounts of the rainfall, thus increasing the biodegradation of various organic pollutants, air contaminants, and the pesticides used. This particular photo here, this is, I believe, along Donald Ross, has a lot of turf in this photo. Maybe they could have enlarged the beds, put some more plant material in. But this particular area was developed after the ordinance came in. So you'll notice some differences throughout my slides, and I can point out when they were done. So one of the other components, site evaluation and the actual design. So a site design, which is primarily going to be developed by a architect at the very early stages of the development, should match the characteristics with the client's desires or the municipality requirements. A site evaluation can definitely help meet those requirements, and you've got to take into account sun, shade, the type of soil that's there, the pH of it, the compaction, slope, drainage, etc. One of the things that always happens later on in the project is that due to the construction activities, you're going to get severe compaction, and you're going to end up potentially with non-native soils as fill, which makes it very difficult then to create the design, only because certain plant materials are going to adhere to it better than others. So let's talk about that plant selection. Based on the site evaluation, the plants selected should basically be suited to the characteristics. They're going to serve particular functions, and a good design will definitely expose these attributes. They should not only improve the appearance or the usefulness by providing shade to the parking areas to reduce the heat in those impervious areas, which will again reduce cooling costs. They should also be positioned to provide a smooth transition from structure to landscape, screening from the roadways, and directing traffic flow into and within the property. So next kind of principle is the efficient watering versus irrigation. So here's something that I remember putting in this slide. that is really needs to be emphasized. Plants do not waste water. People do. And why do I say that? Well, typically in the state of Florida, we end up with somewhere around 50 to 55 inches of rainfall annually. The interesting fact is that St. Augustine grass, which is our primary cultivar of turf grass here in South Florida, requires about 50 inches of rainfall per year to survive. The tricky part is basically getting that to be, 4 inches a month over the course of the year versus getting 12 inches in 1 month to the next, and that's where irrigation comes in. So most commercial properties that have modified the soil and habitat to fit the needs of the site, in order for that property to receive their certificate of occupancy, they have had to meet the town's or the municipality's landscape requirements. In theory, this all sounds great, but one of the factors that does not typically get considered is the type of irrigation controller. Most of native plants, trees, grasses, as I mentioned before, require less than 40 to 55 inches of irrigation per year. And that is our average. The problem is it's just not spread out evenly over the 12 months. So in order to get the supplemental water, we have to add an irrigation system. It is really imperative for these HOAs or condo associations to adopt a smart irrigation system, which will utilize a weather station. And not a rain sensor, but a weather station. Soil moisture sensors can be good as well. And rain sensors are typically what are installed at new construction because they are the easiest, most cost-effective method to get a clock to turn on and off. And if we're all familiar, if you're not familiar, I'll say it real quick. A rain sensor simply is a float in the top of a small cup. The rain goes into the sensor. It pushes the float up, it hits a sensor, tells the irrigation system to turn off. The problem is 2 hours later, rain stops, that's 90 degrees, the water inside of the little cup evaporates, the float goes down, and the system once again thinks it's okay to run. So you'll find it running even when it's raining until that cup is full again. Whereas a weather station will actually monitor the humidity, the amount of rainfall, temperature, the evapotranspiration, and it will model all of this behavior based on the type of soil and the zip code that you're in. We can talk more about that in the end, and just so we will take some questions. So if you've got anything that I'm buzzing through and you have a question on, please add it to the chat, and I'll make sure to get to it before the end of this class. Okay, so using the proper irrigation system, the design, the installation, and management will provide many benefits. And this is really for the HOA. It's going to save money. And how does it save money? Well, it's going to improve the life of the pump, for example, giving it a longer lifespan if it does not have to cycle as many times. It will use the water more efficiently. So, if you're pulling from a lake in times of drought, it will optimize what's left. It'll make the material more drought resistant and pest resistant, and it's also protecting the state's water reserves. There's a couple of sites down there that will be shared obviously later. So if you'd like to refer to any of those at the end for some additional information. Okay, so how do we kind of help, I guess, increase the aesthetics in a development, but also meet the goals of sustainability? So in regards to irrigation, the main issue is the lack of system division. When you drive into these communities with the fantastic entrances and the big water features, and they've got, the humongous beds for the annuals, because, face it, everyone loves flowers. The problem is that it's never divided up where the rotors are only for the grass on one zone, and then you've got mist for plants on another, or mist for turf, and then a bubbler on each palm and tree. A lot of times those annual beds are placed in the middle of a turf grass section where it's getting the irrigation from the rotor zone, which means we have to then add more time and more days to a rotor zone in order to supplement the flowers that need it, even though the turf grass does not. we find a lot of times that in the zero lot line construction homes, they have an irrigation zone running down one side of the house, and then we've got another one on the other side, and it's about 8 to 10 feet apart, and both of those mist head zones are spraying towards each other, creating a flood in the middle, typically causing the grass to become anaerobic because it can't get oxygen because it's flooded at all times. So the grass dies, we get weeds, and then complaints, and then end up a solution of putting in rock or some type of pathway to alleviate that, or shutting down the irrigation altogether. Or on the north side of most homes, especially 2 stories, we find that the lack of sun causes more shade. The turf grass stays wet, and we're more prone to fungus. So better design will definitely help alleviate these and a lot of the newer construction that's taking place. All right, talk a little bit about fertilizer here. So there are so many different types of fertilizer available out there in the industry. And you may wonder, what exactly are the differences? So all fertilization is based on an analysis, and it has to be guaranteed by the label, or the company can actually be fined. So what does that mean? So N stands for nitrogen, P phosphorus, and K for potassium. And all of those items are very specific to each bag. And it actually correlates to a guaranteed weight of that product in the bag. The other, as you'll see below, where it might have nitrate, ammoniacal, which is another form of it. And then you've got the organic, and then the insoluble, and then you might have all of these micronutrients. And each one of those makes up a smaller percentage of the 3 guaranteed products that are in the bag. Now, what will these do? They help basically provide the nutrient for the plant or turf to promote growth. It'll help control the soil acidity or alkalinity, depending on the situation, and also some soil enrichment, and will help create the retention of these organic compounds that are being placed. So that each label should have the manufacturer's name and address on it, the guaranteed analysis, the source, as I mentioned, for the secondary nutrients, and the net weight. This label by law is required on every single bag of fertilizer. Now, in the marketplace, if you go to a vendor, you can find a bag of fertilizer for $6. You can also find a bag of fertilizer for $37, both for the same plant. However, one of them is definitely going to contain all of the nutrients required for a healthy plant. It's going to help rectify some issues that might be found in that soil after a soil test, whereas the other bag is simply putting down sludge and a small percentage of the actual guaranteed analysis that needs. So what are we looking for when we are buying a bag of fertilizer? And this is, good for you in terms of, it's one of those costs that a landscaper, if he underbids a contract, or if the scope of work wasn't correct, they can get away by saving money in this aspect. And how is that? Well, if you were putting down a 666 versus say a 14-2 12, the difference is about $15 to $20 per bag of fertilizer. And then when you've got to put down 200 bags at each quarter, substantially, there's a lot of money there that a landscaper could save. So, you want to be up on your fertilizer, label, so that you can question the landscaper and say, hey, why did you choose to use this one this time? And, what benefits? And it'll also just keep everyone kind of improving the aesthetics and appearance of a community. So the higher the solubility, the longer lasting it's going to be. So you want to always look for a blend that has at least a minimum of 50% of slow release, and that's based on the product and how it's coated. If you've got a 70% sulfur coated urea, this product's going to really last that 60, 70, 80 days. So when you fertilize quarterly, you're keeping up with the nutrients, whereas a 30% is only going to probably last you 20 days and it's going to be gone again. St. Augustine needs about 4 to 6 pounds per 1,000 square foot a year. And that can change. You know, if you've got a property that's being irrigated by reclaimed water, you probably could get that down to 2 to 3 pounds because there's so much nitrogen inside of the water that's being placed on the turf. And in fact, properties that have reclaimed water, a lot of times will recommend going down to 2 or 3 fertilizations a year max. You know, we can always pull a soil analysis to see that that is accurate and make sure we're putting the right label. And then also, you know, we talked a little bit again, as I said, about the rates based on water usage. So when applying fertilizer, is there anything to be cautious of or to know? Well, you know, back around, I think it was 2014, a new law was passed where anybody applying fertilizer on your property actually has to go and get certified. And it is through the best management practices. And they're going to touch on the amount of fertilizer to apply and how actually to adjust your spreader so you're putting down the right amount of fertilizer. It's going to talk about when to fertilize, which times of year, when not. It's going to talk about your ring of responsibility, for example. So along any water body, you are not allowed to get closer than 10 feet if you are using a broadcast spreader, or between 3 and 7 if you're using a drop spreader. Florida's making a real big push. You know, we're sitting on top of this large aquifer, and we really don't want to get these fertilizers directly into a water source. So we want it to be utilized by the root system of the plant or the turf, and that is one way we're helping to protect that. You never want to fertilize brand new grass. You definitely want to wait, you know, 45 days, 60 days or so, because when they were at the nursery where or the field where it was grown, they were getting plenty of fertilizer to push that growth. I don't know if anybody's heard the term fertigation. This was at the time, thought to be a genius idea, which really was not. It doesn't exist really anywhere anymore, but people were directly injecting fertilizer into the irrigation system. And it was a liquid so that it would be just like a tank that had an injection system. And what was happening is, you know, a nozzle is not quite directed the right way, and now you're literally spreading fertilizer onto people's cars, windows, walls, sidewalks. So that quickly went away. Okay, mulching. So we probably have fans of mulching out there. We probably have fans of not. And let's talk a little bit about mulching and the I don't want to say myths, but ideas behind it. And that may be, I think it might, honestly, it might depend on budgets. It might depend on location. But what is mulching? It refers to the recycling of a material. Typically, it's a hardwood. We want to avoid those mulch products where they are pallets or construction debris. It does happen. There are companies out there that will use that stuff to save cost on buying the right material to mulch. And mulching can be considered grass clippings, leaf droppings. It can be pine straw. But what are the benefits of this process? So primarily, it's to prevent loss of water via, you know, evaporation or evapotranspiration. So you definitely want to have a minimum of a 2 to 3 inch deep layer in order for it to achieve that, which will also then help suppress the mulch the weeds within the mulch or below it. It'll create a more uniform soil temperature, which is ideal. Here in South Florida, you know, we're dealing with mid-90s temperatures consistently for several months in the summer, which heats up the root system, which can basically can fry it. It can shut it down until the cooler temperatures, so it doesn't uptake any nutrients or water. So it's very, very important, in my opinion, and University of Florida and others in the industry, that mulch is applied a minimum of once a year. It typically breaks down in around 6 to 7 months, so twice is ideal. It also prevents the soil at the top layer from crusting. I don't know if you've ever gone out there midsummer and just put a hose on top of I say soil, we don't have soil, we really have sand, but you'll notice the water just sit there on top and not percolate through because it's created this hard crust layer on the top. That mulch will eventually break down, creates organic material, which will then in turn increase the nutrient content. And the root system can sometimes actually go into the mulch as well as the soil. So in essence, it's actually producing more roots than an unmulched plant. And in some, it adds beauty, others it does not. So that's just a personal opinion in terms of aesthetics. So I think you'll see on this slide, I've got a couple of tchotchkes here highlighted. For us landscapers, those are nightmares for us because they're just targets to end up hitting with either a rock coming out of the edger or the mower. We've got to be careful around them. But this picture really is just to show the separation between a grass and mulch bed. And when you've got that clear delineation, it actually does look nice in terms of defining the bed area. Okay, so what should we do when you've got a strip that is outside of a planter or a bed area, I should say? Do we want to put mulch there? Do we add more plants, or do we shrink the bed and actually add turf grass? So on most commercial sites, the bed areas tend to be narrow in nature, again, utilizing the footprint as much as they can, and it will create a scenario where you need to make a choice. In most circumstances, turf grass is used simply because it's, the most cost-effective per square foot. So what we have is, a piece of sod is 18 inches wide by 2 foot long. So you'll see this 18-inch thick band of grass, and it'll struggle either because of the maintenance practice of how we have to cut it, because we can't put a mower on it. It's too narrow. So we might have to weed eat it. Or if we do put a mower on it, it's going to be kind of stressed in terms of you're going to be running over part of it with a tire because of the size and not the other side. So you could, if it's in a bed, you're going to have half tire on, half off, and you could potentially break roots as it's in the softer soil as opposed to underneath the sod. So how close is it to concrete, and depending on how close, it has an inability to disperse the heat. So if it's propped up against a sidewalk and on the other side is a building, there's really nowhere for that kind of heat to relieve itself to. So what happens? It just goes right to the root system of that turf. What irrigation head do you put in there? Is it a strip head? Is it a half? Makes it a little challenging. Mulch is really considered often, but it's rejected due to its requirement to be replenished every few months. So in most situations, a shrub or an ornamental grass is probably the best choice, but site conditions will dictate, and we'll go through a couple slides later on to show what that is. So here's a parking lot. I think this was outside of a Home Depot Publix right after construction. So you can see brand new white curbs. This slope was created in order to berm to kind of hide some of the parking areas. So typically a hedge is planted at the top. You've got this slope, and then they throw grass right there on it. So the problem is that the runoff will end up going right down onto the parking lot. The soil tends to be inorganic or sterile because it's brought in from another site, a lake dredged, etc., and pretty much sterile as well. And the berm is usually steep, so it's very difficult to mow. So it's done with a weed eater, and then maintaining the height is difficult. So what happens? The irrigation is there, it's hitting it, but all the water is running straight down, so it's not getting to the root system when it's needed. And ultimately you end up with the grass dying, except at the fingers where it's flat at the end. And this example shows you. So it's a poor design and a bad idea. This is also the same parking lot of that commercial site. So what do we see here? So they were required, more than likely, from the municipality to add a shade tree every so often, or so many square feet. So what does that do? Great. It does shade the sidewalk as intended, but then the sidewalk will tend to stay wet due to the shade, and it will become slippery. And as you can see there, that one's, graying and turning black already from the fungal growth. And here's that strip of grass again, where I mentioned earlier that, it's got concrete on both sides, typically 15 degrees hotter than what the grass is, burning the root system at the edges and, kind of moving sideways, affecting the entire grass strip. All right, so mowing as a practice of one of the 6 principles. Most of the properties here in South Florida have St. Augustine or a variety of a floratam grass. And the maintenance of this cultivar is very important. This type of grass was created by the University of Florida. If we got any Gator fans out there, you can thank the horticulturist there for this turf grass, designed specifically because of our rainfall and our climate. So how do we maintain a healthy turf grass? So we want to make sure we're mowing at the correct height. St. Augustine grass is recommended from University of Florida about 3.5 to 4 inches. And that's going to help create a dense, turf, as well as a good, healthy root system. And the thicker the turf grass, the more ability it has to suppress the weeds. It will stop water runoff. A good, healthy root system is going to make sure that the nutrients are absorbed and not wasted. Fewer weeds in this means less need for herbicide. And, we should never try to take more than 1/3 of the grass blade off at any time. And why this is important is there are some contracts where the budget, unfortunately, may allow for only 30 mows a year. But it's truly not enough, because what we're doing is causing a lot of stress to that turf grass if we're taking off more than 1/3. So we really try to promote at least 36 cuts per year. 38 to 39 is optimal, because we typically have a couple of summer months that have a full 5 weeks in them. So we want to try to get that mow in each time there, so we don't have to schedule 10 days apart. It also shows that the grass recycling here on St. Augustine does not increase thatch. It actually decomposes really quick, and it in turn creates a fertilizer or organic matter back to the soil, which is very important. So we never want to remove the grass clippings or rake them up or bag them up ever. And I know that seems very uncommon for those from the Northeast or the North who are, used to bagging your grass clippings and then decomposing them or composting them. But yeah, not in South Florida. So, okay, pruning. This is another important maintenance task, and it really should be part of your monthly cycle. It's going to not only help improve the health, it's going to reduce the risk of failure. It'll control growth and will enhance the fruiting or the flowering of the particular shrub that you're working on. And depending on where it's being placed, the selection can even help eliminate many of the pruning requirements if it's the right plant, right place. I don't know. I slightly disagree with that one in South Florida. It seems like we can never stop things from growing. So let's see here. Okay, some of these myths, and if those of you that have sat through this class before, I tell this one, and I'm not on the screen now, but I shave my head, and there is this myth that if you cut the top of a hedge, it's going to cause the bottom to thicken up. Well, I've been shaving my head for 3 years now. I can tell you the hair on my legs has not gotten any thicker. There's nothing changing there. So not like I want it to, but just telling you, there is no effect. If you really want a hedge to thicken up the bottom, the only way to do that is to actually make cuts wherever you want it to thicken up. Wherever you make a cut, you will get 2 shoots come off. So in essence, all you're doing when you continue to cut the top off is you are creating the top to get thicker, which when we've got to maintain at 6 or 8 foot, that happens every month. So, and eventually you end up with a hedge that's almost a reverse pyramid because it's so thick at the top and ends up at the bottom. But everybody wants stuff trimmed and looking nice in Florida. So that is what we are requested to do. This is another common myth. Rocks are like mulch. No, they are not. Rocks retain heat. They cause the soil layer to warm up. They don't help retain moisture. In fact, the rain will hit the rocks and the rocks are extremely hot. It'll cause them to cause the moisture or the rainfall to evaporate much quicker. They do not break down. They don't create any organic material. Another common myth is, you need to fertilize at the base of the palm. No, not at all. There's what's known as a root shoot ratio. And what that refers to is where the drip line of your palm fronds are or your tree branches, directly below is the root zone. Those roots typically are as far out as the palm frond's furthest tip is or the branches on the tree. So you want to truly spread that fertilizer directly underneath the drip zone. And the problem here is in South Florida, we have trees and palms planted in swales. We have them planted at the corner of driveways. We can't get the fertilizer to where it actually needs to be. So it gets placed at the base of the palm. So not only do the people and the boards and the committees that are reviewing, are you getting fertilizer? It's so that they can see it was applied. There should really be more discussion as to, maybe we should use a liquid. Maybe if, you're going to see these dark green bands on the, 6 feet away from the base of the palm, when you see that happening, that's because we fertilized your palms. So that's a myth that also just needed to be cleaned up. And Roundup. So another common myth with Roundup is, they sprayed it, they killed my plants. When Roundup is sprayed, it will become completely innate in the soil if it is sprayed on the soil. It does not translocate to the root system of a plant or a shrub or an ornamental in the ground. You would have to directly spray the plant itself in order to burn it or cause it to die. When you're spraying weeds 2 inches tall and a plant is 6 inches away, it will not affect that plant. So that is another myth that just needs to be cleared up. You can't hurt a plant or a turf by overwatering it. That is absolutely incorrect. You can drown turf grass. You can drown the root systems, again, to make them anaerobic, which means a lack of oxygen to that particular plant, causing it to shut down. And you're going to create a fungus situation. So yes, it's you should only supplement hand water with irrigation or a hose when you see that plant leaf starting to wilt, or you see the blade of grass start to fold up. That would be the only time. Okay, how do you manage pesticides responsibly? So with all the previous components that we've talked about, if they're managed correctly, hopefully it will completely alleviate the need for pesticide. This concept, better known as integrated pest management, is just that. It's the emphasis on the components we discussed: mowing, trimming, fertilization, and irrigation. So yes, for sure, when every year we get, I think it's a few dozen new pests brought into the country from container ships, whether it be on plant material shipped in from other countries, a grasshopper that happened to get into a container, whatever it may be. If it is not native to our country, our state, we're going to then have to figure out the means in order to address this particular pest. But as long as we are using the right plant in the right place, as long as we're adopting the agronomic program above with the right mowing, trimming, fert, and irrigation, hopefully we can alleviate using pesticides and just use a more simpler approach with the biologicals that are naturally occurring within the landscape. All right, pest control. This is a mouthful. I will read it just because it really covers the kind of meat and potatoes of the entire 482 law. And it is defined as the selection, integration, and implementation of multiple pest control techniques based on the predictable economic, ecological, and sociological consequences, making the maximum use of the naturally occurring pest controls, such as weather, disease, agents and parasitoids using the various biological, physical, chemical, and habitat modification methods of control, and using artificial controls only as required to keep particular pests from surpassing the intolerable population levels predetermined from an accurate assessment of the pest damage potential and the ecological, sociological, and economical costs of other control measures. A lot of big words, really sums up the whole idea of why we use pest control. So let's kind of take a step back and say, you know, what is a weed? Well, weed is basically a plant in an undesirable location. It truly is that. What, you know, here in Florida, we want manicured beds at the HOAs. You know, people go nuts seeing weeds in beds. They are truly 1,000+ weed seeds in every square inch of soil. So the possibility of eradicating weeds is never possible. You can apply as many kind of pre-emergence, post-emergence. 2 weeks later, you're going to have weeds. It's just as simple as that. And again, it is just a plant in an undesirable location. If it's out in the middle of the woods, nobody cares about weeds. You only care about them when they're growing through the turf, where sunlight germinated a weed seed, where there was a gap in the turf, or in the mulch. If there was no mulch, you'll find those beds are the most difficult to maintain. So this is the same as pests. We're going to always have pests. We are always going to have to use the processes in order to maintain and keep them at what is considered an acceptable level, before they create an economic situation or an ecological situation. And that's really what we want to try to control. So that sums up the Florida line. And, you know, we try to use an IPM. We don't want to blanket spray herbicide or blanket spray a pesticide over the entire property and kill everything, because then we're also going to kill our beneficials and our biological agents that exist naturally. Once we wipe that all out, we'll never have any controls. Okay, so what is required to be able to be a landscaper here in South Florida? And in order to do that, you've got to have a local occupational license. You need to have your limited certification for commercial landscape maintenance. If you are going to apply pesticides, you have to have a pest control business license and be a certified operator. If you are going to be cutting trees according to ANSI or any other standards, you need to have an arborist license. Now, you also have to carry what is called a limited, which will cover your herbicide. So if you have somebody spraying weeds in your community, they have to have a license, and they are qualified underneath your pest control operator or on their own, taking the individual herbicide license. If you are going to be applying fertilizer, that should be weed and feed, not weed and seed. So if you're going to be applying fertilizer, you also have to have a license, and same with pesticides. So there's a fine. The problem is that you know, here in the state of Florida, there's not enough agents to monitor this. So there are a lot of people out there cowboying it, putting it down without any license or qualifications or training. And you know, it's not comparing apples to apples when you've got a contractor, you know, charging X to do a community versus, you know, contractor charging Y, because they're not following the guidelines or the steps required in the community or in the state. Okay, so why do we use an IPM process instead of going straight to chemical? So we have to identify the pest. We also have to identify the plant, and knowing whether or not that plant can actually take that particular chemical. We have to determine the life cycle that it is currently at. What we're going to apply is very different if it's at the egg stage, the pupa stage, or the larva nymph stage, or an adult. And really will determine the type of product and how it's applied. Can we use a cultural method, a mechanical, a physical, or biological? And for example, there is a type of grasshopper, almost like it's very similar to a kind of a cicada in terms of how quickly it can decimate a plant, where when it's in its larva nymph stage, very easy to control. when it gets up to kind of the pupa stage, it's black, it's dark black with like a little orange line on it. It can potentially take some pesticide in order to control it. And then as it grows to be 1.5 inches, 2 inches long and bright orange, yellowy color, the only thing that you can do is stomp on them. There's no other way to kill them. You can spray till your heart's content with pesticides over top. They're not going to die. So you've got to decide the best method. And then you've got to determine whether or not what you've done is the actual corrective action to reduce that pest population. Okay, so we're going to go kind of changing gears a little bit here. We're going to talk about some things that we'll see in the landscape that are typical down here. This particular home, I think this was from a community in North Palm Beach Gardens. I think it was Evergreen. Great, that is what was considered an Audubon community. So it had a very high level of natives interacting with the kind of the Florida staples. Landscape was tiered, good selection, great spacing, and it actually received this certification in order to get that Audubon Society star in order to do this design process. So what if I was to tell you that same community had a resident who just loved plant material? I couldn't get enough of it. So they had 5 magnolias, very large. Magnolias will, especially the D.D. Blanchards, will grow 40 feet tall, 20 feet wide. They had 5 of those, 4 Montgomery palms, 2 silver Bismarcks. Bismarcks can grow 50 feet tall and be 30 feet wide. Oak trees, which can go 40, 50 feet tall. 3 fishtail clusters, they can get 12 foot wide, 30 foot tall. Traveler palms are as a clustering palm, so they can grow shoots and become 20 foot wide and 50 foot tall. Ligustrums, lady palms, all within a 4,000 square foot area. So get ready for it. This is what that looked like. That is in between 2 homes, less than 15 feet apart from each other. One side 0 lot line, the other one was a little bit larger. There was turf grass in between there. This is the typical example of what happens when somebody overplants or puts the wrong plants in the wrong spot. And what should that really look like? Well, if you go a couple doors down, that is what it looked like when the builder planted it. So you've got a Parotis on the left, which Everglades palm, native. You've got just some nice, simple individual stalk palms, nothing overhanging, and the turf can get the necessary sunlight it requires. And that's what you end up with, a nice quality landscape that is easy to maintain. Here's another, I think, I'm not positive this was the same community, but called it the Builder Special, 0 lot line homes. There is a 50-foot tall royal palm planted 2 foot from the driveway. Cypress on the other side, which is now about 30, 40 foot tall. It's a 2-story home that it's towering above. The one on the right requires quite a bit of water. It also produces a 40 to 60 pound seed pod. The palm fronds itself weigh about 20 pounds. So nobody parks on that side anymore. And then you've got this desert, kind of cultivar on the left here that requires no water, typically found in California or Arizona, underneath the same irrigation with everything else. This is what we see in commercial sites, very typical. Lack of fertilization because the commercial property just picks the cheapest landscaper, never gets fertilization, doesn't ever apply the right amount of mulch when they do get the contract to mulch, poor staking techniques. Just something we typically see. I love this slide. So I think I mentioned earlier that section of Donald Ross up there in North Palm, where that development was, I think, somewhere around 2010, 2008, somewhere around there. So it was adopted after the ordinances had taken place. So you could never see actually what was back there. Terrible for the retail world because they're not able to advertise actually, on the street. But this is Okeechobee Boulevard in West Palm. Clearly an example of a development that was prior to the matrix that the municipalities and cities adopted. There's not a tree, palm plant, grass, anything whatsoever along I don't know, 12 miles of this roadway, Okeechobee, if you're familiar with it. It's just all retail space. On the other hand, here was I think it's now, it's changed names. It used to be a Gander Mountain. I think now it's like a kind of like a bedding, like, I'm not sure what it's called, but anyway, this was a great design. They were able to use native material, place the palms and trees in a manner in which it helped shade the property. So created better cooling costs or efficiency. It did in certain sections hides the building very well. There was good transition for parking to sidewalks to get in that allowed the sidewalks to be clear of shade so that they would dry and not be slippery. This was these were the islands inside of their parking areas, which did exactly as they were supposed to, shade the parking spaces. They used native grasses as opposed to turf grass in the islands. All great choices. And it also looks nice and very sustainable, and it's still there today. This was that other plaza off of the other side of Donald Ross. Very successful design. Hides the kind of the commercial spaces back there, which again for them may not be great, but as you're driving aesthetically, it looks great. Really does help transition some temperature off of the roadways, and doesn't use a lot of water. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here. I think time-wise, we're getting very close. So if there are any questions, feel free to pop them in there right now, and I'll try to get to them. If not, great. Thank you. I've done my job. This was a survey that was taken back in 2010. And I include this one because if you're taking this, you're either either involved within the management of a community that has landscape. Potentially, you just need a CU, and you really aren't interested in landscape at all, or you want to learn more in order to help educate your boards and the members that may have moved down from up north and are not familiar with our industry and our material. This study was done in 2010, and it basically covers the top 10 counties in terms of sales and employment. So back in 2010, the landscape service industry, from horticultural retailers, landscape designers, et cetera, were responsible for $15.3 billion in revenue for the state. And they created about 205,000 jobs. Now, that study was redone in 2020. That number is currently at 31 billion, so it has doubled in the last 10 years, and it is now averaging about 266,000 jobs created or typical throughout the year in South Florida. Or this, actually, I think this one covers the state. So big change in the last 10 years. And as you guys know, these numbers are probably even low for what we've encountered over the last 4 years since COVID. And this just breaks it down. Who's providing the most of that revenue and jobs. It comes down to the HOAs, then the COAs after that are next. And then you've got the commercial establishments, then builders, developers, landscape, government, et cetera. So this really kind of shows you the breakdown. Okay, so that concludes the talk. I did want to, if I've got just 2 minutes left, a few minutes left here, I'd like to quickly talk about something that a lot of people have asked about when we're, visiting our properties, and it comes down to two different topics: the lethal bronzing, as well as the lethal viral necrosis. And I don't have any questions, so I'm going to talk about it real quick. So lethal viral necrosis, so LVN, also known as sugarcane mosaic, which is basically the pathogen of where it comes from the fields that were, prior to all these developments that existed here in Florida. It is in the soil. It is transmittable, and it's basically transmittable on the tires of mowers that can take it from one yard to another, as long as the grass is being cut while it's wet. If it's dry, it does not typically transmit. Typically takes about 3 years for it to die once the St. Augustine has developed the pathogen. It is not treatable, so there is nothing we can do about it. We typically have to, spray it dead, cut it out, and replace it with, say, a Citra Blue, which has been shown so far to date to take and handle the pathogen. The other way it's transmitted is by an aphid. So there's basically two means. It's mechanical with a mower, or with an aphid, which is a type of pest. The other thing that is a little bit more alarming, because of the sheer economic value of the palms that it affects, is called lethal bronzing, first discovered in 2006. That primarily affects all of the Phoenix varieties, the queen palm, cabbage, the pindo palms, coconuts, and it derives from a phytoplasma, or a bacteria, that is transmitted by one leafhopper. So it's one individual type of pest that transmits it. It is called a cixid. The kind of real true name for it is the Haplaxis crudis. This disease cannot be spread by a cutting tool or by any mechanical means within a landscaper's arsenal that they may use. It is uncurable. The only way to actually slow this disease, or to stop it, or this, I shouldn't say disease, I should say pathogen or bacteria, is by a product called oxytetracycline hydrochloride. And you actually spray that to the turf grass around the palm or the plants in order to kill this leafhopper. You really need to kill the host. And why it's so important is it affects so many varieties of palms, that you really have to inject them for about a 2-year cycle in order to help prevent this kind of increasing or transmitting. And you can't cure it, but you can keep it at bay by using the OTC. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on those, because you might be hearing those terms out there when you're talking to your landscapers. And if there's anybody who has any things they want to discuss about it, please feel free to reach out. So site development plant, this is from Sheldon. Really, that comes down to a landscape architect, somebody in the early stages of development, maybe like a Kotler and Hearing, Tunning and Associates. There's a bunch out there, but that's typically who you would hire to do that. What can I do to discourage iguanas, Annette? Oh my goodness. If we could figure that out, I think we could all patent it and sail off into the sunset. Communities have hired sharpshooters. I just attended a meeting this morning where they're paying $1,000 a month, and they are taking out, 30 plus iguanas a month, and they still have hundreds on their properties. An iguana, I think, has 17 mates. And I think they each, their incubation period is like 4 months, and produce like 40 at a time. There's just no natural predator. So we're struggling. Most annuals are getting eaten. We're experimenting with plant materials. They're eating crotons. They're getting on beyond the annuals. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for that one yet. Let's see. Organic weed killer. There's a couple out on the marketplace. Obviously a white vinegar works. There are products called Miramichi Green. That's probably one of the most effective that I have seen out there. Yep, somebody asked about, no, I don't recommend stones as mulch. It is aesthetically very pleasing and economically more viable because they last longer. Yeah, Susan asked about the mulch with landscape blowers. Yeah, that's a matter of throttling the blower as you go past to the right speed so you don't blow it out. But that's very difficult to do because the grass does stick to it. David asked a question about the best plants to use in a roundabout. Um, I would say because of the heat and also the confined nature for the water to dissipate, because it's trapped inside of there, you've almost got to go with a a succulent or an agave of some kind, because he mentions it's non-watered. I would think that might be a good idea. Um, let's see here. Uh, native soil is asked about a native soil. So our native soil is sand. We actually don't have a what is considered a soil like in the north, because the way that Florida formed, we don't have any nutrient capabilities within our soil. It's sand. So we just have to supplement with fertilization. That's the best way to go about it. Let's see here. Okay, so Connie asked about reclaimed water, and I'm going to try to buzz through as many of these as I can, as quickly as I can. The negative impacts primarily that it has, I think, is just over fertilizing the turf. So the grass grows very quickly. So what we don't want to do there is we definitely don't want to supplement with more nitrogen. We want to use a lot more micronutrients that will allow the soil, the root system, in order to better absorb that water that's being utilized. I think that's really one of the only ways we can do it. Bahia grass, no, does not require dethatching. Arthur asked that question. We can't. You also cannot fertilize Bahia, and you cannot spray pesticides on it. You will kill it both ways. So that's just a matter of cutting and letting it be. Let's see. Another question about iguanas. Yes, Ricky asked about aphids eating on the shrubs. Yep, dawn and water, spraying the leaves. Yes, that does work. That is, otherwise there's a product called Seven, which helps a number of pests similar to that. Let's see, getting rid of ferns. They've got to be dug out. Their rhizomes that are growing way down will pop up everywhere. They've got to be dug out. You could spray them, but it does not kill off the root system. Landscaping personnel who cut the grass. There's not an actual license for cutting grass. Like basically a certification. What is out there exists through the Florida Nursery and Growers Landscape Association. I personally sit on the board of the certification committee there. There is what's called an FCLMT. It's called the Florida Certified Landscape Maintenance Technician. I highly suggest that most people get certified through the FNGLA, and that way they're actually put through several different processes to better understand how to cut grass, the pattern, the heights, the speed, etc. So there is that, but it's not required by the state. It should be required by every landscape owner that their employees have it, though. Letting your grass grow excessively long between mowing periods does not promote weeds. It will help better shade out. So it is nicer to keep your lawn closer to that 4-inch height rather than scalp it. Let's see, Ron asked about a site evaluation. Yes, available. I think Ashley will put contact information at the end. You could reach out to us to do that, or any landscaper if you have a vendor already. Okay, I'm trying to get through here. Somebody asked about a good plant for in between driveways. Something like a Fakahatchee grass, sand cord grass, something that is softer, that doesn't create a branch. But if you're looking for height, you're going to need something with a softer leaf type and branching system. So maybe like a green arbicola as opposed to a cocoa plum if you are looking for a little bit of height. A good fertilizer. So good question from Julian right here. So for palms and ornamentals, a 13-3-13 is kind of like considered the Cadillac, or a 12-4-12. Contains all your micronutrients as well as a good blend of your NPKs. For turf grass, a 24-11 or a 15-0-15, depending on the type of year, that will kind of fluctuate. And you want to make sure it's got a minimum of a 50%, either sulfur or a type of, carbon coated product in order to reduce the how quickly it breaks down. Mulch, great to be turned or raked every few months. Great idea, especially if there's not a budget to replenish it. Turning it will do just the same. I don't have an answer for bufo toads. Sorry, we are not allowed to treat with our licensing toads or not basically nuisance pests like regular ants. We can't treat. We can treat fire ants because they're a hazard. I know bufos are to animals, but we can't treat those, so I can't answer that question. Okay, I think that's my time. So I thank you very much in attending, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to join you all here today.
Thanks for watching. For more great educational content, click the subscribe button now.